The house had been too quiet for too long. Robert moved through it like a ghost, careful not to disturb the silence that had settled after Sarah's death. But the dog didn't accept silence. Every morning, Duke would take his place near the burgundy chair by the bay window, the one Sarah used to read in, and he would wait. Ears forward, tail still, eyes locked on the empty seat as if any moment someone would return. Robert had tried to sit there once, in the early days. Duke had growled so fiercely he'd never tried again. The chair belonged to someone else, someone who was gone. Except maybe she wasn't. Because on a gray October morning, when frost still clung to the windows and the world felt brittle and cold, a woman knocked on his door. She said her name was Emily. She said she knew Sarah. And when Robert let her in, when she glanced at the chair and asked, almost reverently, "May I?" something shifted. Duke rose, walked to the woman and sat at her feet. No growling, no guarding, just peace. Emily looked at him with sad, knowing eyes. "Your wife left something behind," she said, "and I think it's time you knew what it was." Robert's hand trembled as he gestured toward the kitchen table. The burgundy chair remained between them, a monument to grief neither had yet named. Emily didn't sit at the table. She stayed near the chair, her fingers brushing the worn armrest as if reading memory through touch. Duke hadn't moved. His massive frame pressed against her legs, head resting on her knee with a familiarity that made Robert's chest tighten. "How did you know my wife?" Robert's voice came out rougher than intended. 3 years of disuse had made conversation feel foreign. Emily pulled a worn photograph from her jacket pocket and placed it on the table between them. The image showed Sarah, younger but unmistakably her, standing in front of a building Robert didn't recognize. Beside her stood Emily, maybe 20 years old, holding a diploma. Both were smiling. "She was my teacher," Emily said quietly. "Not officially. She never wanted credit for it. But she changed my life, Mr. Matthews. She saved it, actually." Robert picked up the photograph with careful fingers, as if it might dissolve. Sarah had been an English teacher at the local high school for 30 years. He knew her students loved her. But this felt different. The way Emily spoke carried weight beyond gratitude. "I don't understand," Robert said. "Sarah never mentioned you." She wouldn't have. Emily's smile was sad. "That was part of the arrangement. She helped kids like me, the ones who fell through the cracks. Foster system bounces, runaways, throwaways. She found us, gave us a place to exist for a while. No questions, no judgment, just space to breathe." She paused, looking at Duke. "And your dog always knew which ones needed her most." The words settled like snow. Robert looked at Duke, who had finally moved, positioning himself directly in front of Emily, as if standing guard, or offering comfort. Robert couldn't tell which anymore. "This chair," Emily continued, her voice softer now. "This was where she'd sit with us. One at a time, usually late afternoon, after you'd gone to your workshop." She met his eyes. "You built furniture, right? In the garage?" Robert nodded slowly. The workshop had been his sanctuary. 2 hours every evening, crafting tables and bookshelves while Sarah graded papers inside. Or so he'd thought. "She never told you because she didn't want you to carry the risk," Emily said. "Some of the kids she helped, they were running from bad situations. Dangerous people. If anyone came looking, she wanted you to honestly say you didn't know anything." Robert's throat constricted. He thought of all those evenings, sawdust in his lungs and classic rock on the radio, while his wife sat 50 feet away harboring secrets that could have destroyed them both. The betrayal should have stung. Instead, he felt something else. Pride, maybe, or heartbreak that she'd carried such weight alone. How many? He asked. Over the years? Maybe 40, 50? Emily's fingers traced the chair's armrest again. I was number 37. Showed up on a Tuesday in November, hadn't eaten in 3 days. Your wife found me sleeping behind the library, brought me here, sat me in this chair, and made me the best grilled cheese sandwich I'd ever tasted. Robert remembered that November. Sarah had mentioned wanting to help more at the community center. He'd encouraged it, proud of her generosity. He never knew the community center was code for their living room. Duke always knew, Emily said, looking down at the German shepherd. He'd position himself between us and the door, but never aggressive, just watchful. Sarah used to say he could smell fear, and he knew the difference between the kind that hurt you and the kind that saved you. As if understanding, Duke's tail thumped once against the hardwood floor. After Sarah died, Emily continued, her voice catching slightly, I didn't know if I should come. Part of me wanted to show up at the funeral, but I wasn't sure if that's what she would have wanted. She was so careful about keeping her two worlds separate. Why now? Robert asked. Why come after 3 years? Emily reached into her other pocket and pulled out an envelope, yellowed at the edges and sealed with red wax. Sarah's handwriting marked the front in careful script. Because she made me promise, Emily said, placing the envelope on the table. If anything happened to her, I was supposed to wait 3 years, then bring this to you. She said you'd need time to grieve first. Time to remember her the way you always had. But after that, she wanted you to know the truth. Robert stared at the envelope like it might catch fire. His hands wouldn't move. Couldn't. There's something else, Emily said gently. She knelt beside Duke, running her fingers through his fur. The dog leaned into her touch, eyes closing briefly. Duke wasn't just a pet, Mr. Matthews. He was part of her work. Sarah trained him specifically to recognize trauma in people. He could tell when someone was shutting down, dissociating, spiraling. He'd intervene before things got bad. That explained so much. The way Duke would sometimes press against Robert's legs during particularly difficult days. How the dog seemed to sense storms of emotion before they broke. Sarah had always said Duke was special, that he understood more than most dogs. Robert had thought it was just love talking. She left instructions, Emily said, standing again. For Duke, I mean. In case you wanted to continue her work. There's a network, people like me who aged out of her care and want to give back. We've been waiting to see if you'd want to know about it. Robert finally picked up the envelope. The wax seal bore Sarah's initials, pressed with the ring he'd given her on their wedding day. His vision blurred. Can I? He started, voice breaking. Can I read this alone? Emily nodded, already moving toward the door. I'll come back tomorrow, if that's okay. There's more to show you, but only if you want to see it. She paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, Mr. Matthews, she loved you more than anything. She told me once that you were her safe place, the reason she could be brave enough to help the rest of us. Then she was gone, and Robert sat alone in the kitchen with an envelope that held his wife's secrets and a dog who'd known them all along. Duke moved to the burgundy chair and lay down beside it, head on his paws, eyes watching Robert with patient understanding. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Outside, frost melted slowly in the morning sun. Robert broke the seal. The letter was dated 2 weeks before Sarah's cancer diagnosis, written in her careful hand on pages that felt soft with age. My dearest Robert, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and enough time has passed that I hope your anger has softened into curiosity. I'm sorry for keeping secrets. I'm sorrier still that I can't be there to explain them in person, to see your face as you learn about the part of my life I kept hidden. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I loved you too much to risk your safety for my choices. Robert's hands shook so badly he had to set the letter on the table to continue reading. Do you remember the first time we met? You'd come to fix the broken desk in my classroom, fresh out of vocational school with sawdust still in your hair. I watched you work for an hour, the way your hands moved with such certainty, such care. When you asked me to coffee afterward, I almost said no. Not because I didn't feel it, that immediate pull toward you, but because I was afraid. I was already doing the work by then, already helping kids the system had forgotten, and I knew that loving someone meant putting them at risk. He did remember. August of 1987, St. Joseph's High School, room 204. She'd been grading papers while he worked, occasionally glancing up to watch him plane the desktop smooth. When he'd finally worked up the courage to ask her out, she'd stared at him for 10 long seconds before smiling and saying yes. "But you were so good," the letter continued, "so genuine. And I thought, maybe I can have this. Maybe I can have a life that's mine, separate from the work, a place where I get to just be Sarah instead of the woman who fixes broken things. You became that place for me, Robert. Our marriage, our home, our quiet evenings together, they were the eye of the storm. They were peace." He remembered those evenings differently now. All those times he'd retreated to his workshop, giving her space, thinking she needed time to decompress from teaching. She'd been harboring runaways, feeding kids who'd slipped through society's fingers, being a sanctuary. "Duke was a gift from one of my former students," Sarah wrote. "Marcus Chen, if you remember him. He went on to become a dog trainer for therapy programs, and he helped me select and train Duke specifically for this work. The dog knows how to read people, Robert. He knows when someone is dangerous versus desperate. He kept me safe all these years, and now I'm trusting him to keep you safe too." Robert looked at Duke, who hadn't moved from his position beside the burgundy chair. The dog's eyes were open now, watching him with that unsettling intelligence Sarah had always praised. "There's a box," the letter continued. "Emily will show you where. Inside are journals, names, addresses of every child I helped. Some of them went on to do remarkable things. Others are still struggling. A few didn't make it, and those losses still haunt me. But I kept records because I wanted you to know that our quiet life together, our simple home, it held more stories than most people encounter in a lifetime." His tears fell openly now, spotting the paper. He didn't wipe them away. "I know what you're thinking," Sarah wrote, and he could hear her voice so clearly it hurt. "You're wondering why I didn't tell you. You're questioning every memory, every conversation, wondering what else I kept hidden. But Robert, my love, I didn't hide this from you. I protected you from it. There's a difference." Was there? He wasn't sure anymore. The woman he'd mourned for 3 years had been real, but incomplete. A partial sketch of someone far more complex and brave than he'd known. "If you choose to continue this work," the letter concluded, "Emily and the others will help you. Duke already knows what to do, but if you choose to simply know and then let it go, I understand. You've earned your peace. I just didn't want to leave this world without you knowing that every quiet evening we shared, every ordinary moment, they were precious to me because they were ours. They were the life I chose, even while I was choosing to help others too." The letter ended with 3 words. "Always yours, Sarah." Robert sat motionless for a long time. The morning stretched into afternoon. Duke eventually rose and pressed his head against Robert's knee, a gentle reminder that he wasn't alone, that he'd never been alone, even when he thought he was. Finally, Robert stood. His joints protested, stiff from sitting too long. He moved to the burgundy chair and, for the first time since Sarah's death, sat down. Duke's reaction was immediate. The dog's tail wagged once, twice, then he settled at Robert's feet with a deep sigh, as if something had finally shifted back into place. Robert looked out the bay window at the street beyond. Frost had fully melted now. A car passed, A neighbor walked their dog. The world continued, ordinary and oblivious. But inside this house, inside this chair, Robert felt the weight of stories he'd never heard. Children who'd sat where he was sitting, broken and afraid, while his wife worked magic with simple presents and grilled cheese sandwiches. Duke keeping watch, Sarah building shelter from the storm. He'd spent 3 years grieving a woman he thought he knew. Now he'd spend the rest of his life getting to know her again. When Emily returned the next morning, she found Robert in the burgundy chair with Duke at his feet. Sarah's letter spread across his lap. He looked up as she entered, and she must have seen something in his expression because she smiled, relieved. "Tell me everything," Robert said. So she did. Emily pulled another chair close and began with her own story. 14 years old, 4th foster home in 3 years, parents dead in a car accident she'd survived with nothing but scars and guilt. The last family had been fine. Not cruel, but not kind either. She'd been inventory, another mouth to feed, a check from the state. When the father's brother moved in, the way he looked at her changed everything. She'd run before anything happened, sleeping rough for a week before Sarah found her. "She didn't ask what I was running from," Emily said. "She just asked if I was hungry. Then she brought me here, sat me in this chair, and made me food. Your dog, Duke, he positioned himself by the door. Not threatening, just present, like he wanted me to know I could leave whenever I wanted. But while I was here, no one was getting in." Robert listened, hands folded in his lap. Duke rested between them, a bridge. "I stayed for 3 months," Emily continued. "Sarah would tutor me in the afternoons when you were at work. She'd make sure I had clean clothes, a safe place to sleep in the guest room. She never pushed, never demanded explanations. Just existed alongside me until I was ready to tell her myself." "Where was I?" Robert asked, the question that had been burning since yesterday. "How did I miss a teenager living in my house for 3 months?" Emily's smile was gentle. "You were there. You just didn't see me. Sarah was careful about timing. I'd leave before you got home, come back after you went to bed. The guest room was always being renovated, or having air quality issues. You worked long hours back then, right? The furniture business was good?" He nodded slowly. 1998 had been one of his busiest years. Custom orders backed up for months. He'd been pulling 12-hour days in the workshop, coming in exhausted, barely noticing anything beyond dinner and bed. "She protected you from it," Emily said again. "Not because she thought you wouldn't understand, but because some of these kids, they had people looking for them. Bad people. If anyone had come asking questions, she wanted you to honestly say you'd never seen them." The logic made sense, but it still stung. Robert had spent 40 years thinking he and Sarah shared everything. Now he was learning she'd compartmentalized him out of love. "After 3 months," Emily continued, "Sarah helped me get emancipated. She knew a lawyer who worked pro bono, helped me navigate the system. By the time I turned 16, I had my own apartment, a part-time job, and a scholarship application for college. I'm a social worker now, have been for 12 years. "Because of her," Robert said softly. "Because of her," Emily confirmed. "And I'm not the only one. Sarah had a gift for finding the ones who were worth saving, but had given up on themselves." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through photos. Image after image of young people, some in graduation gowns, some in military uniforms, some simply smiling at the camera with hard-won peace in their eyes. "This is Marcus," Emily said, stopping on a photo of a young man in his 30s with a German shepherd at his side. The one who trained Duke. He was one of Sarah's first kids back in the early 90s, ran away from an abusive father, spent 2 years on the streets before she found him. He's a K-9 trainer for the police department now. Robert recognized something in Marcus's smile. the same quiet intensity Sarah had carried. "This is Jennifer. She's a nurse, comes back every year to volunteer at the youth shelter. This is David, he's a teacher now, working in the same district Sarah did. And this is Alex. They're an artist in Portland, doing murals for community centers." The faces blurred together, a gallery of lives redirected. 40 or 50, Emily had said, all of them carrying pieces of Sarah forward into the world. "She called it passing on the chair," Emily said, gesturing to the burgundy wingback. "Every kid who sat there was supposed to remember what it felt like to be safe, and then find a way to give that feeling to someone else. It's why I became a social worker, why Marcus trains therapy dogs, why Jennifer works extra shifts at the homeless clinic." She paused. "Your wife started a ripple, Mr. Matthews. It's still spreading." Robert's chest felt too tight. He'd spent their entire marriage thinking he was the solid one, the provider, the foundation. Sarah had been the soft place, the nurturer. But she'd been building something, cathedral-sized, while he crafted end tables. "There's more," Emily said, pulling a key from her pocket. "Sarah rented a storage unit. It's been paid for 5 years in advance. Inside are all her journals, documentation of every kid she helped, letters they sent back to her. She wanted you to have it, but only if you wanted it." Robert took the key. It was warm from Emily's pocket, small and ordinary. A kingdom fit in his palm. "I'll take you there whenever you're ready," Emily said. "But there's one more thing you should know first." She reached down and scratched Duke behind the ears. The dog's tail thumped appreciation. Sarah trained Duke with specific commands, phrases that mean something to the kids who've been through her care. If you decide to continue her work, Duke will know what to do. He's been waiting for 3 years to work again. "What kind of commands?" Robert asked. Emily looked at the burgundy chair, then back at him. "Tell Duke to find someone who needs the chair." Robert felt foolish, but he looked down at his dog and said clearly, "Duke, find someone who needs the chair." The German shepherd's transformation was immediate. His ears shot forward, his body tensed with purpose, and he moved to the front door with clear intent. Not frantic, but focused. Working. "He's scent trained," Emily explained, "but it's more than that. Sarah believed he could sense emotional distress. Cortisol levels, maybe, or something we don't have words for yet. She'd take him on walks through town, and he'd guide her to people who needed help." Robert stared at his dog, seeing him clearly for the first time. This wasn't a pet who'd been loyally mourning beside an empty chair for 3 years. This was a working animal who'd been waiting for orders, waiting to resume his purpose. "I've been keeping him idle," Robert said, the realization crushing. "He's been trying to work this whole time, and I've been keeping him locked in grief with me." "You didn't know," Emily said gently. "But now you do. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" Robert looked around the living room, at the burgundy chair that held more stories than he could count, at the bay window where morning light spilled across hardwood floors, at Duke, still standing by the door with patient purpose. "Show me the storage unit," he said. The unit was across town, tucked in a facility that looked like it had been there since the 70s. Emily led him to number 247, and Robert's hands shook as he fit the key into the lock. Inside was a lifetime of secrets carefully organized. Plastic storage bins lined the walls, each labeled by year. Sarah's handwriting marked every lid. 1989, 1992, 1993, 1995, 1996, 1999. On and on, up through 2019, just months before her diagnosis. Emily pulled down the first bin and opened it. Inside were journals, spiral-bound notebooks filled with Sarah's careful documentation. Names, dates, situations. Each entry was a story. March 15th, 1989, Robert read aloud from the first page. "Danny Sullivan, age 16, found sleeping in the park. Bruises on his arms, old cigarette burns on his hands. Won't talk about parents. Duke alert level, high. Brought him home. He ate 3 sandwiches and fell asleep in the chair. We'll try again tomorrow. Entry after entry, year after year. Sarah's quiet war against a world that forgot its children, documented in careful prose. She never used real names, Emily said, in case the journals were ever found, but there's a master list encrypted on a USB drive with actual identities and current contact information. For you, if you want it. A lot of them would love to meet the man Sarah talked about. Robert pulled out another journal, this one from 2003. Flipping through pages, he found an entry that made him stop breathing. October 8th, 2003. Robert's 60th birthday today. Made his favorite cake. He doesn't know I spent the afternoon with another scared kid who needed the chair. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being fair to him, having this double life. But then I remember why I do it, and I know he'd understand. He'd probably want to help. That's the kind of man he is. But I can't risk it. Can't risk him. He's the good in my life that keeps me steady enough to face the dark. His vision blurred. He set the journal down carefully, afraid he might crush it. She loved you so much, Emily said softly. Every entry mentions you, even if just in passing. Robert built a new bookshelf today. Robert brought home flowers. Robert's laugh makes everything okay. You weren't separate from her work, Mr. Matthews. You were the foundation of it. They spent hours in that storage unit, pulling out journals, reading entries, piecing together 30 years of hidden heroism. Each bin revealed another layer of Sarah's secret life. Robert found photographs tucked between pages, kids sitting in the burgundy chair, faces carefully blurred, but postures telling stories. A boy with his arms wrapped around Duke, a girl sleeping peacefully in the guest room, a teenager laughing at something off camera, joy captured in a moment Robert had never witnessed. One bin contained letters, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, addressed to Sarah from people she'd helped. Robert pulled one at random and began to read. Dear Mrs. Matthews, you probably don't remember me. I was the kid who broke your lamp in 1997. I'm writing to tell you I'm graduating college next month. First person in my family to get a degree. None of it would have happened without those 3 months in your house, without your dog who somehow knew when I was about to spiral, without you teaching me that I was worth saving. I named my daughter Sarah. I hope that's okay. Thank you for everything. Robert's hands shook. He pulled out another letter. Sarah, it's been 10 years since you found me behind the grocery store. I've been clean for 8 years now, have a job, an apartment, even a cat. Sometimes I still wake up panicked, thinking I'm back on the streets. But then I remember sitting in your chair while you made me soup, and I breathe through it. You saved my life. I wish I could have told you that before you died. Emily says you knew anyway. I hope that's true. Letter after letter. Gratitude stretching across decades. Lives redirected, futures rewritten. All because Sarah had chosen to pay attention when the world looked away. There must be 200 letters here, Robert said, his voice barely a whisper. 217, Emily corrected gently. She kept everyone, read them when she needed reminding why the work mattered. Robert found another journal, this one different from the others. Personal entries, not case notes. He opened to a random page dated June 2011. Today was hard. The Stevens girl ran away again, back to the boyfriend who beats her. I can't force her to stay safe. All I can do is keep the door open, keep the chair ready for when she's ready to try again. Robert asked why I seemed sad at dinner. I told him I was worried about a student's grades. Half-truth. He held my hand across the table and said whatever it was, I'd figure it out because that's what I do. He believes in me so completely. Sometimes I wonder if he'd believe in this work if he knew about it. Then I realize he already does. He believes in me, which means he believes in everything I am, even the parts he can't see." Robert's throat closed completely. He set the journal down, unable to continue. Emily knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "She documented everything because she wanted you to understand how much she loved you even while doing this, maybe especially while doing this. You weren't a secret she kept from the work, Mr. Matthews. You were the reason she could do the work at all." Duke had moved closer during their reading, pressing against Robert's leg with warm solidity. The dog seemed to understand this was a moment that required his presence. Another bin held medical records, heavily redacted but detailed. Documentation of injuries Sarah had treated privately to avoid mandatory reporting that might send kids back into dangerous situations. A burn treated with silver sulfadiazine. Stitches placed by a doctor friend who asked no questions. A broken wrist splinted and wrapped, healing crooked because the kid refused a hospital. "She bent rules," Robert said, seeing his wife with new clarity. "She bent rules to protect people those rules had failed," Emily corrected. "There's a difference." In the bottom of one bin, Robert found a small wooden box. Inside was a collection of objects. A child's bracelet with plastic beads spelling Hope. A military dog tag belonging to someone named Rivera. A photograph of a young woman in a cap and gown. Inscription on the back reading, "Because of you, I made it. Thank you." "These are the ones she worried about most," Emily said softly. "The successes she was afraid to. Celebrate too loudly in case they fell apart. She'd take these out sometimes and just hold them, reminding herself that good things lasted." Robert pulled out the dog tag and turned it over in his fingers. Metal worn smooth with handling. Sarah had touched this hundreds of times, drawing strength from it. "What happened to Rivera?" he asked. "He's a veterans counselor now in Seattle. Helps soldiers transitioning back to civilian life. Sarah helped him when he was 17 and freshly kicked out for being gay. He's saved dozens of lives since then by preventing suicides." The ripple kept spreading. Robert could see it now, visualize it like rings in water expanding infinitely outward. Sarah at the center, each person she'd helped creating their own ripples. Marcus training therapy dogs, Jennifer running a homeless clinic, David teaching, Emily social working, Rivera counseling veterans, and each of them touching more lives, creating more ripples, on and on into infinity. "She built this," Robert said, gesturing to the bins. "This whole universe of care, and she did it without recognition, without credit, without anyone even knowing." "She had recognition," Emily said. "She had 217 letters. She had kids coming back years later to say thank you. She had Duke, who worshipped her, and she had you, who gave her a life stable enough to do unstable work." Emily paused. "That's more recognition than most people get for anything." Robert pulled out another journal, this one from 2015, near the end of Sarah's active years before the cancer. The entries were shorter, writing shakier, but the commitment remained clear. February 3rd, 2015. New kid today. 16. Pregnant. Terrified. Sat in the chair for 3 hours before saying a single word. Duke lay across her feet the whole time. Finally, she asked if I would judge her. I said no. She asked if I would help her figure out what to do. I said yes. This is why I do it. These moments when someone chooses to trust after every reason not to. Robert made lasagna tonight. I ate 3 helpings. He said I seemed lighter. I was. Robert closed the journal carefully. What happened to the pregnant girl? She's a nurse now. Kept the baby. He's 9, healthy, loved. She works in the maternity ward, helps other young mothers navigate the system. Of course she does, Robert said, because by now he understood the pattern. Everyone passed on the chair. They continued through bins for another hour. Documentation of medical emergencies Sarah had handled. lists of resources she'd compiled. Phone numbers for lawyers, doctors, therapists who'd help quietly. A whole infrastructure built in shadows, functioning perfectly because it had to. In the final bin, Robert found a sealed envelope with his name on it in Sarah's handwriting, different from the letter Emily had already delivered. This one was marked, "Open after you've seen everything." His fingers trembled as he broke the seal. Inside was a single page. "My dearest Robert, if you're reading this, you've learned my secrets. You've seen the journals, the letters, the evidence of 30 years spent helping kids the world forgot. I imagine you're feeling many things right now. Betrayal, maybe. Confusion. Perhaps anger that I kept this from you. I want you to know something, and I need you to believe it because it's the truest thing I've ever written. You were never outside this work. You were the foundation of it. Every kid I helped because you gave me a life stable enough to take risks. Every time I brought someone to our home, I did it knowing that if things went wrong, you'd protect me. You were my safety net, my soft place to land, my reason to believe good men existed. Without you, there would have been no Chair, no Duke, no saved lives. You did this work with me, Robert. You just didn't know it. And now you do. So the question isn't whether you can forgive me for keeping secrets. The question is whether you can forgive yourself for not seeing how essential you were all along. Because you were. You are. And whatever you choose to do with this legacy, know that you've already done more than enough just by being exactly who you are. All my love, always and forever, your Sarah." Robert sat on the cold, concrete floor of the storage unit, surrounded by 30 years of his wife's hidden heroism, and wept. Not from betrayal or confusion or anger, from understanding, from recognition, from the overwhelming weight of being seen completely by someone who'd loved him enough to protect him from her own courage. Duke pressed against him, warm and solid. Emily sat quietly nearby, giving him space to feel everything at once. When Robert could finally breathe again, he looked up at Emily through tear-blurred vision. She was extraordinary. "She was," Emily agreed, "but she thought you were too. She told me once that you had the purest heart of anyone she'd ever known, that your simple belief that the world could be good made her brave enough to fight for it." Robert looked around at the bins, the journals, the letters, the evidence of a secret revolution built in his living room while he crafted furniture 50 feet away. He thought about all those evenings he'd spent in his workshop, sanding wood and building tables, thinking he was the solid one while Sarah graded papers. She'd been building cathedrals while he built end tables. But maybe that's what she'd needed. Someone building small, solid things while she built something vast and fragile. Balance. "What do I do with all this?" Robert asked again, but this time he already knew the answer. "Whatever you want," Emily said. "Keep it, share it, continue it. Sarah left no instructions beyond making sure you knew it existed. The choice is yours." Robert looked at Duke, who gazed back with knowing eyes. The dog had been waiting 3 years for this moment, waiting for Robert to understand, waiting for the work to resume. "Teach me," Robert said. Robert looked at Duke, who raised his head attentively. The dog had been working his whole life, 12 years of service, and Robert had thought he was just a beloved pet. "How old is he?" Robert asked suddenly. 12, Emily confirmed. "German Shepherds usually work until about 10, but Duke's different. Marcus says he could keep going another few years if he's kept active and purposeful." Robert made a decision. "Teach me." Over the following weeks, Emily became a regular presence in Robert's home. She taught him Sarah's methods, introduced him to the network of former kids who'd become adults, determined to pay forward what they'd received. She showed him how to read Duke's signals, how to know when someone was in crisis versus just having a bad day. "Sarah never went looking aggressively," Emily explained during one of their sessions. She just made herself available and let Duke guide her. The dog has instincts we're only beginning to understand. They practiced with volunteers first, people from Emily's network who were willing to help Robert learn. He felt clumsy and obvious, his 77-year-old hands fumbling with tasks Sarah had made look effortless. But Duke was patient, and slowly, Robert began to understand the language his wife and dog had spoken fluently for years. The first volunteer was Marcus Chen himself, the man who'd trained Duke. He sat in Robert's living room, intentionally projecting the body language of someone in crisis. Hunched shoulders, averted eyes, hands clenched tight. "Watch Duke," Emily instructed quietly. Robert observed as the German shepherd approached Marcus, not with the enthusiastic greeting of recognizing an old friend, but with careful, measured steps. Duke's ears were forward, his tail low, his movements deliberate. When he reached Marcus, he didn't jump or demand attention. Instead, he positioned himself beside the man's leg and simply pressed against him. Solid. Present. Warm. Marcus's shoulders dropped slightly, his breathing evened out. He reached down automatically to touch Duke's fur, and something in his expression shifted from acted distress to genuine emotion. "That's what Sarah looked for," Emily said softly. "Duke doesn't try to fix anything. He just offers presence, steadiness, the message that someone sees you and isn't afraid of what they're seeing." Robert tried to memorize the pattern, the approach, the positioning, the pressure, but it felt clinical when he thought about it that way. "How did Sarah know what to say?" he asked. "Often she didn't say anything," Emily replied. "Sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer is just space, silence without judgment. Duke creates that naturally. Your job is to follow his lead and only speak when speech is needed." They practiced scenarios for weeks. Different types of distress, different ages, different presentations of trauma. Robert learned that hypervigilance looked like darting eyes and rigid posture. That dissociation looked like someone present in body but absent in spirit. That fresh trauma looked explosive and loud, while old trauma looked like silence heavy enough to crush. Duke taught him as much as Emily did. The dog had 12 years of experience reading human pain, and he was willing to demonstrate every variation. When someone was dangerous, Duke's stance was wide, his weight forward, ready to protect. When someone was desperate, his approach was gentle, almost apologetic, offering himself as comfort without demand. Sarah used to say Duke had 3 modes, Emily explained during one session. Guard, guide, and grieve. Guard for danger, guide for the lost, grieve for the hopeless. He'd adjust based on what each person needed. "And if someone was beyond help?" Robert asked the question that had been haunting him. Some of Sarah's journal entries had ended badly. Emily's expression sobered. "Then Duke would grieve. He'd lie beside them and just be present. Sometimes that's all you can offer. Witness. Recognition that someone existed and mattered, even if you couldn't save them." One Thursday afternoon, Duke alerted while they walked through the park. His ears went forward, his body tensed in that specific way Emily had taught Robert to recognize. The target was a teenage girl sitting alone on a bench, hoodie pulled up despite the warm weather, shoulders curved inward. Robert's heart hammered. This wasn't practice. This was real. "Trust him," Emily whispered. She hung back as Robert approached, staying close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to let Robert work. "Excuse me," Robert said, his voice rough with nervousness. "My dog seems to think you might need some company." The girl looked up, eyes red and swollen. She couldn't have been more than 16. "I'm fine." "I'm sure you are," Robert said carefully, remembering Emily's coaching. But my wife used to say Duke here has a sense for when people need a moment of kindness. Would you mind if we sat? Just for a minute? Something in his tone, or maybe Duke's gentle presence, made her nod. Robert sat on the opposite end of the bench, careful to leave space. Duke positioned himself between them, close enough for the girl to reach if she wanted, but not invasive. "I'm Robert," he said. "Claire," she offered after a pause. They sat in silence for several minutes. Duke's breathing was steady, calming. Robert didn't push, didn't ask questions, just existed alongside her the way Sarah had existed alongside so many others. He watched Claire from the corner of his eye, saw the moment her hand crept toward Duke's fur. Testing. The dog didn't move, just accepted the touch with calm certainty. "He's a good dog," Claire said finally, voice small. "He is," Robert agreed. "He was my wife's dog first. She trained him to help people who were having hard days." Claire's fingers dug deeper into Duke's fur. "What kind of people?" "All kinds," Robert said, honestly. "People who felt alone. People who needed someone to see them. People who were carrying too much weight." Claire's breathing hitched. "I got kicked out. My mom's boyfriend, I just couldn't stay there anymore." Robert's chest tightened, but he kept his voice level. "That takes courage, knowing when to leave. Doesn't feel like courage. Feels like being a coward." "My wife used to help kids in situations like yours," Robert said gently. "She always said the bravest thing someone can do is ask for help before it's too late." Claire looked at him fully then. Really looked. "Used to?" "She passed away 3 years ago, but she left behind resources, people who want to help, if you're interested." Emily stepped forward then, introducing herself as a social worker, offering her card with practiced ease. Claire took it, fingers trembling slightly. They talked for 20 minutes, Emily laying out options, resources, safe places. Robert mostly listened, Duke's weight warm against his leg, grounding him in the moment. Claire mentioned she had a friend who might also need help, a boy from school whose father drank too much. Emily took notes, promised to follow up, gave Claire multiple phone numbers to call at any time, day or night. When Claire finally left, Emily's card clutched in her hand, and a promise to call in the morning. Robert felt something shift inside him. A purpose he'd been missing since Sarah died, clicking back into place. "You did good," Emily said. Robert looked down at Duke, who gazed back with knowing eyes. "We did good." But not every encounter ended successfully. 2 days later, Duke alerted to a young man outside the grocery store, sitting with a sign asking for money. Robert approached with Emily's coaching fresh in his mind, but the man was high, pupils dilated, speech slurred. When Robert offered help through Emily's organization, the man became aggressive, shouting that he didn't need charity from some old man and his dog. Duke positioned himself protectively, not threatening but firm. Robert backed away, heart pounding with adrenaline and failure. "Not everyone wants help," Emily reminded him afterward. "Sometimes people aren't ready. Sometimes the substances have too much control. Sometimes trauma has twisted so deep that trust isn't possible anymore. That's not your failure, Mr. Matthews. That's just reality." "Sarah dealt with this," Robert said, not a question. "Constantly. It's why she kept journals. She needed to remember the successes when the failures got too heavy." Robert thought about this that night, sitting in the burgundy chair with Duke at his feet. Sarah had carried this weight for 30 years. The successes and the failures. The kids she saved and the ones she couldn't. And she'd done it while maintaining a marriage, teaching full-time, being the woman Robert thought he knew completely. She'd been Atlas, holding up a world he couldn't see. The next encounter was different. Duke, alerted to a middle-aged woman sitting in her car in a parking lot, engine running, expression vacant. Robert approached slowly, Duke's calm presence giving him courage. "Excuse me," he said through the cracked window. "Are you all right?" The woman blinked, focusing on him with effort. "I'm fine. Just tired." But Duke's body language said otherwise. The dog whined softly, pressing against Robert's leg with unusual insistence. Robert made a decision. "My name is Robert. This is Duke. Would you mind rolling down your window all the way? Duke seems worried about you." Something in his gentle persistence made the woman comply. As the window lowered, Robert caught the smell. Carbon monoxide. Faint but present. The exhaust was running, the garage door had been closed until recently, and the woman's lips had a cherry-red tint that matched nothing else in her pale face. "I'm going to call for help," Robert said firmly, pulling out his phone. "Don't," the woman said, but without force. "Please, I'm just tired." "I know," Robert said, already dialing. "But let's get you somewhere safe first, and then you can decide what comes next. Deal?" The paramedics arrived within minutes. The woman was transported, treated, eventually admitted for psychiatric care. Emily arrived at the scene and put Robert's shaking hands between her own. "You saved her life," Emily said. "Duke saved her life," Robert corrected. "I just made the phone call." "That's all it takes sometimes, just showing up and making the call." That night, Robert added an entry to his journal. His hand shook as he wrote, but the words came anyway. "Today I understood why Sarah did this, why she risked everything, kept secrets, carried weight that wasn't hers to carry. Because sometimes showing up and making the call is the difference between someone seeing another sunrise or not. Duke knew. Sarah knew. And now I know too." That night, Robert sat in the burgundy chair for the first time with intention. The cushion had molded to Sarah's shape over the years, and settling into it felt like being held. Duke took his usual position at the base, and Robert finally understood. The dog hadn't been mourning. He'd been guarding the space, keeping it ready, waiting for someone to resume the work. "I see you now, boy," Robert whispered, running his fingers through Duke's fur. "I see what you've been trying to tell me." The next morning, Robert called the furniture workshop where he'd worked for 40 years and gave his notice. The owner was understanding, if surprised. "Thought you'd already retired after Sarah passed," the man said. "I did," Robert replied, "but I'm starting something new now." He spent that week transforming the guest room, the one Sarah had always kept ready. Fresh sheets, a small desk, basic toiletries. Emily helped him navigate the legal requirements for emergency housing, connected him with lawyers who worked pro bono, taught him the documentation he'd need to keep. "You don't have to do this alone," Emily reminded him. "We're a network for a reason. Share the load." But Robert wanted to understand it first, wanted to earn his place in Sarah's legacy rather than just inherit it. Duke seemed to sense the shift, his energy increasing daily. The dog who'd been lethargic and listless for 3 years suddenly had purpose again. They fell into a routine. Morning walks where Duke would alert to people in distress. Afternoons where Robert would make himself available, either at home or at local shelters Emily connected him with. Evenings where he'd document everything in journals just like Sarah had, maintaining the record. The first kid who stayed overnight was named Marcus, coincidentally sharing a name with the man who'd trained Duke. He was 17, recently homeless after aging out of foster care. Emily had referred him, and when Marcus sat in the burgundy chair, Duke immediately calmed, lying at the boy's feet with patient acceptance. "My wife used to say this chair was magic," Robert told him, setting down a plate of sandwiches. "I think she was right." Marcus stayed for 6 weeks, Robert helped him apply for jobs, navigate paperwork, figure out the basics of independent living that no one had taught him. When Marcus finally moved into his own apartment, he hugged Robert with fierce gratitude. "Your wife saved my life once," Marcus said. "Looks like you're doing the same thing." "Just passing on the chair," Robert replied, using Sarah's phrase. It felt right in his mouth. Word spread quietly through Emily's network. Other kids showed up, referred by social workers or former residents who knew the burgundy chair's reputation. Robert never took more than one at a time, wanting to give each the attention Sarah would have given. Duke worked tirelessly, his instincts sharp and accurate. If the dog trusted someone, Robert did too. By Christmas, Robert had helped 8 kids. By spring, 15. Not all success stories. 2 stole from him, 1 disappeared in the night without explanation, another rejected all help and returned to dangerous situations. But most found their footing. Most sat in that chair and felt, perhaps for the first time, unconditionally safe. On the 3-year anniversary of Sarah's death, Robert hosted a gathering at the house. Emily had organized it, inviting everyone from Sarah's network who could attend. The living room filled with former kids who were now adults, teachers, social workers, nurses, parents. Duke moved among them like a diplomat, greeting each person with recognition that seemed impossible, but was simply Duke being Duke. "I think Sarah would have loved this," Emily said, standing beside Robert near the bay window. "She would have hidden it from me," Robert replied with a sad smile. "To protect me." "Are you angry about that?" Emily asked. "That she kept it secret?" Robert considered the question. Was he angry? Maybe he had been, initially. But standing in a room full of lives his wife had touched, listening to laughter and seeing the ripple effects of her quiet heroism, anger felt small and petty. "I'm grateful," he said finally. "Grateful she trusted me enough to let me be her safe place, even if she didn't tell me everything. And grateful she left this behind so I could know her more completely." They'd set up a photo display on the mantel. Pictures of Sarah through the years, some Robert recognized, some provided by the network. Sarah with young Duke, both of them years younger. Sarah at her classroom desk, grading papers. Sarah in the burgundy chair, reading to a small child whose face was carefully blurred for privacy. Marcus Chen approached, the original Marcus who'd trained Duke. He'd aged well, gray threading through his hair but eyes still kind. Duke immediately went to him, tail wagging with genuine joy. "He remembers me," Marcus said, crouching to embrace the dog. "After all these years." "He remembers everyone he's helped," Robert said. "I'm learning that's his gift." Marcus stood, looking at the burgundy chair with reverence. "I sat there when I was 15. Didn't think I'd make it to 16. Your wife, she didn't just give me a meal and a safe night. She gave me a model for what kind of man I wanted to become." He gestured to Duke. "Training him was my way of thanking her. Creating more dogs like him, dogs who can sense pain and respond with compassion." "How many have you trained?" Robert asked. 47 working therapy dogs, 32 K9 units for police departments, trained specifically in trauma response, and 5 more like Duke, privately trained for people doing work like Sarah did. Marcus smiled. The ripple keeps spreading. As evening settled and guests began to leave, each person approached Robert with stories. Sarah helping them study for a GED test. Sarah finding them a doctor when they were sick. Sarah simply listening when they needed to talk. The woman Robert had loved for 40 years expanded with each story, becoming someone larger and more magnificent than he'd known. When the last guest departed, Robert sat in the burgundy chair with Duke at his feet, exactly as they'd positioned themselves for 3 years. But now he understood. This wasn't mourning. This was preparation. "She's still here," he said to Duke. In this chair, in this work, in every kid who passes through and then passes it on." Duke's tail thumped agreement. Robert pulled out his phone and scrolled to a photo Emily had given him. Sarah in her 50s, gray threading through her dark hair, sitting in this very chair with Duke as a puppy in her lap. She was looking at the camera with an expression Robert recognized. Not the public smile she wore for school photos, but the private one she saved for him. The one that said, "I see you, and I'm choosing you every day." He'd thought he was her whole world, but he'd been her safe harbor while she navigated storms. The distinction mattered. Oh, knock at the door interrupted his reflection. Duke's ears perked, and his body tensed in that specific alert posture. Robert rose, joints protesting, and opened the door to find a young woman, maybe 19, standing in the porch light with a backpack and terrified eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "Emily Turner gave me this address. She said maybe you could help." Robert looked at Duke, who had positioned himself by the door with calm certainty, not guarding, but welcoming. He looked back at the girl, seeing Sarah's courage reflected in desperate hope. "Come in," Robert said, stepping aside. "Are you hungry?" She nodded, tears starting to fall. Robert led her to the burgundy chair, and she collapsed into it with the weight of someone who'd been running too long. Duke immediately settled at her feet, an anchor in the storm. "What's your name?" Robert asked gently. "Sarah," she whispered. Of course it was. Robert felt his wife's presence so strongly in that moment he almost turned, expecting to see her standing in the kitchen doorway with that private smile. "Sarah's a good name," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to crack it. "My wife was named Sarah. She used to say this chair had magic in it, that if you sat here long enough, things started to make sense." The girl looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Does it really?" "Let's find out," Robert said. "First, though, I'm going to make you a grilled cheese sandwich. That's what my Sarah always did. And while you eat, you can tell me as much or as little as you want." He moved to the kitchen, Duke following to supervise. As Robert pulled out bread and cheese, he heard the young Sarah's breath start to steady. The chair's magic, or maybe just the relief of being safe for the first time in however long she'd been running. Robert thought about the storage unit full of journals, the network of survivors who'd become helpers, the dog who'd spent 12 years learning to read human pain. He thought about his wife, brilliant and brave, building all of this in secret to protect him from the risk. He'd spent 3 years mourning her. Now he'd spend the rest of his life honoring her. The grilled cheese sizzled in the pan. Duke sat attentively, ready to work. Through the doorway, Robert could see the young Sarah curled in the burgundy chair, still scared but no longer alone. "Okay, my love," Robert whispered to the wife he could no longer see but finally understood. "I've got it from here." And somewhere, in whatever space existed beyond this one, Sarah smiled. Because the chair's magic wasn't in the furniture. It was in the people who chose to pass on safety, one scared kid at a time. The seasons turned. Robert's hair went from gray to white, his hands grew stiffer, but his purpose remained clear. Duke aged beside him, slower now but still sharp, still capable of sensing pain in others. They worked together, man and dog, continuing what Sarah had begun. The burgundy chair welcomed 30 more kids over the next 3 years. Some stayed days, others months. Each one learned what it felt like to be unconditionally safe, and most went on to create safety for others. The ripple spread wider. Emily visited weekly, helping coordinate with social services, connecting kids to resources Robert couldn't provide alone. The network grew. Marcus trained more dogs. Jennifer expanded the homeless clinic's hours. David started a mentorship program at his school. Each person who'd sat in Sarah's chair found their own way to pass on what they'd received. On a spring morning 5 years after Sarah's death, Robert woke to find Duke hadn't risen from his bed. The German shepherd, who always greeted sunrise with patient readiness, remained curled in his spot, breathing labored, eyes clouded with something beyond age. Robert knelt beside him immediately. "Hey, boy, what's wrong?" Duke's tail moved once, a tiny acknowledgement, but he didn't try to rise. The vet arrived within the hour, making a house call Robert would be forever grateful for. Dr. Stevens had known Duke since puppyhood, had watched him work alongside Sarah, understood what this dog meant. She performed her examination gently, checking vitals, listening to Duke's chest, feeling along his spine. When she finished, her expression told Robert everything before she spoke. "His heart is giving out," she said quietly. "It's been working harder than it should for months, probably years. The strain of his work, the constant vigilance, it takes a toll even on the strongest dogs." "Can you fix it?" Robert asked, though he already knew. "We can try treatment, medications, monitoring, lifestyle changes. But at 12 years old, with his condition as advanced as it is, we'd be prolonging rather than healing. He'd spend his last months uncomfortable, anxious, losing the dignity that's been his entire identity." Robert's hand trembled as he stroked Duke's head. The dog looked up at him with eyes that still held intelligence, still held purpose, but also held acceptance, as if he'd known this day was coming and was ready for it. "How long?" Robert whispered. "Days, maybe a week. He's in pain now, Mr. Matthews. Not terrible pain, but it will get worse. And Duke has spent his entire life reading when others are suffering. I think he knows his own situation." Robert sat on the floor of his bedroom, Duke's massive head in his lap, and tried to figure out how to say goodbye to a dog who'd taught him everything about courage and compassion in just 5 years. It wasn't enough time. It would never be enough time. Emily arrived within the hour, summoned by Robert's broken phone call. She sat beside them, her hand joining Robert's in Duke's fur, and together they held vigil. "He saved so many people," Robert said, voice cracking. "Kids who wouldn't have made it without him. And I kept him locked in grief for 3 years, wasted 3 years of his working life because I was too blind to see what he was trying to tell me." "You weren't blind," Emily said gently. "You were grieving. And once you understood, you gave him purpose again. Those last 5 years, Mr. Matthews, he did more good than most dogs do in entire lifetimes. You gave him that." But guilt still gnawed at Robert. All those mornings watching Duke stare at the empty chair, thinking the dog was mourning, when really he'd been waiting. Waiting for orders, waiting to work, waiting for Robert to understand. "I'm sorry, boy," Robert whispered, tears falling into Duke's fur. "I'm so sorry it took me so long." Duke's tail moved once more. Forgiveness, or perhaps understanding that there was nothing to forgive. They spent the day together, the 3 of them. Emily called the network, and people began arriving. Marcus Chen came first, the man who'd trained Duke as a puppy. He knelt beside the dog and spoke in soft tones, words Robert couldn't hear but Duke seemed to understand. The dog's tail wagged weakly, recognition flickering in clouded eyes. Jennifer came, the nurse who'd been one of Sarah's first kids. She brought flowers and tears, sitting with Duke's paw in her hand, while she told him about all the patients she'd comforted using techniques she'd learned watching him work. David arrived with his 2 small children, explaining quietly to them that this was the dog who'd helped Grandma Sarah save people. The kids sat carefully beside Duke, petting him with gentle reverence usually reserved for something holy. One by one, people from the network came to say goodbye. Each person Duke had helped, each life he'd touched, they came to return the favor. to sit with him in his final hours, the way he'd sat with them in theirs. The house filled with quiet grief and overwhelming gratitude. As evening fell, the visitors gradually left until only Robert, Emily, and Duke remained. Dr. Stevens returned, black bag in hand, expression heavy with compassion. "It's time," she said softly. Robert carried Duke to the burgundy chair. The dog who'd guarded that chair for 8 years, who'd understood its importance better than any human, deserved to rest there at the end. Robert settled into the cushions with Duke across his lap, the dog's weight familiar and precious. Emily sat on one side, Dr. Stevens on the other. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, the same colors as Duke's eyes had once been. "You did good, boy," Robert whispered, his voice breaking. "Sarah would be so proud. I'm so proud." Duke's gaze found his, held it with effort. In those clouded eyes, Robert saw everything. The work they'd done together, the lives they'd saved, the children who'd sat in this very chair and found safety because Duke had shown them it was safe to trust. "You can rest now," Robert said. "You've earned it. You've earned so much more than rest, but it's what I can give you. So rest, Duke. And if you see Sarah wherever you're going, tell her I finally understand. Tell her I'm continuing the work. Tell her I love her." Dr. Stevens administered the first injection. Duke's breathing eased, the pain leaving his body even as life prepared to follow. Robert held him close, feeling each breath slow, each heartbeat soften. "Thank you," Robert whispered. "Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for being patient while I learned. Thank you for showing me what my wife was too afraid to show me herself. Thank you for everything." The final injection went in. Duke's eyes closed gently, his body relaxing completely into Robert's arms. The last breath came so quietly, Robert almost missed it. One moment Duke was there, the next he was simply gone, leaving behind only the weight of memory and gratitude. Robert held him for another hour, unable to let go. Emily cried quietly beside him. Dr. Stevens waited with patient compassion, giving them time. When Robert finally stood, his legs were numb from sitting so long, his arms aching from Duke's weight. But he carried the dog himself to Emily's car, refusing help. Duke had carried him through grief and into purpose. The least Robert could do was carry him this final distance. Emily helped him bury Duke in the backyard the next morning, beneath the oak tree where Sarah used to read on summer afternoons. They dug together, Robert's old hands struggling with the shovel, but refusing to stop. This was his to do, his responsibility, his honor. They marked the spot with a simple stone, Marcus Chen arriving with an engraving already prepared. "Duke, a good boy who knew when people needed saving. 2013-2025. 12 years, Robert said, reading the dates. He lived 12 years and spent every single one of them in service. Like Sarah, Emily said quietly. Like Sarah, Robert agreed. The house felt impossibly empty after that. Robert sat in the burgundy chair and waited for grief to swallow him whole. He'd lost Sarah, learned her secrets, found purpose in continuing her work, and now lost the final piece of her he'd had left. The dog who'd bridged the gap between the woman he thought he knew and the hero she'd actually been. But instead of drowning, Robert felt something else. Completion. Sarah had given him work that mattered. Duke had given him the tools to do it. And now, even without the dog's instincts to guide him, Robert understood enough to continue. He pulled out his journal and wrote through the night, documenting everything he'd learned from Duke. The body language cues, the approach strategies, the way to read whether someone needed space or presence or intervention. All of it carefully recorded, so it wouldn't be lost when Robert eventually followed Sarah and Duke into whatever came next. By dawn, he'd filled 30 pages, a manual for recognizing human pain, written by a 79-year-old man who'd learned it from a dog. A week later, Marcus Chen arrived with a puppy, 8 weeks old, black and tan, enormous, paws promising future size. The same bloodline as Duke, 3 generations removed but carrying the same genetic gift for reading human emotion. "This is Duke's granddaughter," Marcus said, placing the puppy in Robert's arms. "I've started her training, but she needs someone to finish it. She needs the chair." Robert looked down at the puppy, who gazed back with familiar amber eyes. Recognition flickered, not of Robert specifically, but of the chair behind him. The puppy's head turned, focus sharpening on the burgundy wingback the way Duke's had always sharpened. "What's her name?" Robert asked. "That's up to you," Marcus said, "but Sarah might be appropriate." So Sarah the dog joined Sarah's chair in Sarah's house, and Robert taught her everything Duke had taught him. The puppy learned quickly, instincts sharp and true. Marcus came weekly to help with specialized training, teaching the puppy to recognize cortisol levels, read micro-expressions, sense dissociation before it became dangerous. By the time Sarah the dog was 6 months old, she was alerting to people in crisis with accuracy that reminded Robert painfully of Duke. The work continued, just with smaller paws and more enthusiastic tail wags. The first person Sarah the dog helped was a college student sitting on a park bench at 3 a.m, laptop open but eyes vacant. The puppy, still gangly and uncoordinated, padded over and placed her head on the student's knee with such gentle certainty that the young man started crying immediately. "I didn't think anyone would notice," he said when Robert approached. "I've been sitting here for 6 hours trying to figure out if anyone would care if I disappeared." "Someone would care," Robert said, sitting beside him. "I care. And this puppy she's named Sarah after my wife, who spent 30 years making sure people knew they mattered. I think she'd want you to know you matter too." They talked until sunrise, Robert offering resources, Emily's number, the burgundy chair if the student needed a place to exist safely for a while. The young man eventually went home, crisis averted, Sarah the dog's first save recorded in Robert's journal. "She's going to be just like Duke," Emily said when Robert told her about it. "Maybe better. She has Duke's instincts and your experience now. That's a powerful combination." The work continued to spread. Emily's organization grew, opening satellite offices in 3 neighboring states. Each office kept a burgundy chair in the waiting room, a symbol of Sarah Matthews's legacy. Kids would come in, see the chair, and some would ask about it. The social workers would tell Sarah's story, and the story would spread further. David, the teacher, started a program at his school called the Burgundy Chair Initiative. Any student could request time in a special room with a comfortable chair, no questions asked. Trained counselors waited nearby, but didn't intrude unless needed. In the first year, the initiative prevented 4 suicides and connected dozens of at-risk students with resources. Jennifer expanded her homeless clinic to include a therapy dog program, working with Marcus to train German Shepherds specifically for trauma response. Within 3 years, 50 dogs had been placed with shelters, clinics, and social service organizations across the country. The ripple kept spreading, wider and wider, but always traceable back to one source: a high school English teacher and her dog, working in secret to save kids the world had forgotten. On the 10-year anniversary of his wife's death, Robert sat in the burgundy chair with Sarah, the dog, at his feet. He was 84 now, moving slower, sleeping more. But kids still came. Emily, now running her own nonprofit, still referred them. The network, enormous now and spanning several states, still held the original house and chair at its center. Robert pulled out the letter Sarah had written, the one Emily had delivered so many years ago. He'd read it hundreds of times, but the words still carried power. "You were right," he said aloud, addressing the wife who'd been gone a decade. "I understand now. You didn't hide this from me. You protected me so I could protect you. And when you were gone, you trusted me to carry it forward." He looked around the living room. Photos covered the walls now. Kids who'd passed through, updates from their lives. Graduation photos, wedding invitations, birth announcements, each one a testament to Sarah's quiet revolution. The burgundy chair had hosted over 100 kids in the decade since Sarah's death. Some returned as adults to introduce their children, to say thank you, to sit in the chair one more time, and remember what it felt like to be seen. Robert understood now that Sarah hadn't been keeping secrets. She'd been building something too large for one person to maintain alone. By keeping him separate during her lifetime, she'd ensured he'd be fresh and able to take over when she couldn't continue. It was strategy, not betrayal. A knock at the door pulled him from his reflection. Sarah the dog alerted immediately, body tensing with purpose. Robert rose slowly and opened the door. A man in his 40s stood there, vaguely familiar. He held a young boy's hand, maybe 6 years old, who clutched a worn teddy bear. "Mr. Matthews," the man said, "you probably don't remember me. My name's Daniel. I stayed here for 2 months back in 2004. Your wife? She helped me get into college." Robert did remember. Danny Sullivan, the first entry in Sarah's first journal. Bruises and cigarette burns, now healed and replaced with laugh lines and the confident posture of someone who'd overcome. "I remember," Robert said warmly. "This is my son, James," Daniel continued. "I wanted him to meet you, wanted him to see the house that saved my life. And I wanted to tell you that I'm a foster parent now, 3 kids currently, all because I remembered what your wife taught me, that broken things can be fixed with patience and a safe place to exist." The boy, James, looked up at Robert with curious eyes. Sarah the dog approached and sat at the child's feet, gentle and calm. James giggled, reaching out to pet her. "Is this the magic chair?" James asked. "It is," Robert confirmed. "Would you like to sit in it?" James climbed into the burgundy chair, tiny in its embrace, while his father talked with Robert about the work he was doing, the kids he was helping. The ripple spreading ever outward. When they left an hour later, Robert returned to the chair and sat in the indentation James had left. Still warm. Still holding the promise of safety. He pulled out his own journal, the one he'd been keeping for 10 years, and began to write. Year 10. Daniel Sullivan returned with his son. The boy sat in Sarah's chair and asked if it was magic. I said yes, because it is. Not the furniture itself, but what it represents. A place where broken people can rest long enough to start healing. Sarah built this with her whole heart, and I've been honored to maintain it. He paused, pen hovering over paper. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Sarah the dog slept at his feet, paws twitching with dreams. I think about legacy a lot now, Robert continued writing. What we leave behind. Sarah left this chair, this house, this network of people who refuse to let anyone fall through the cracks. I'll leave it too, when my time comes. Emily has already promised to find someone to take over. The work won't end just because we do. He set down the pen and looked at the chair, worn now from a decade of heavy use. The fabric was faded, the stuffing compressed, but it remained strong. Like the work itself, like the people who'd passed through it. Thank you, Robert said to the empty room, to the wife who'd trusted him with her secrets, to the dog who'd taught him how to help, to every scared kid who'd found courage in this burgundy embrace. Thank you for letting me be part of this. Sarah the dog raised her head and looked at him with knowing eyes. Not the original Duke, but close enough. Carrying forward the same gift, the same purpose. Robert settled deeper into the chair, feeling its familiar contours. Outside, the world continued its chaos. But inside this house, inside this chair, there was peace. And tomorrow there would be work. There would always be work. Because some chairs hold more than bodies. Some hold hope. And once you've sat in Sarah's chair, once you've felt what it means to be unconditionally safe, you spend the rest of your life making sure someone else gets to feel it, too. That was the magic. That was the legacy. That was love, passed forward one scared kid at a time. And as Robert closed his eyes in the gathering dark, surrounded by photos of lives he'd helped redirect and memories of a wife who'd been braver than he'd ever imagined, he understood that he hadn't been living half a life while Sarah kept secrets. He'd been living his whole life exactly as she'd needed him to, being her safe place so she could be safety for others. Now he was both. The safe place and the safety, the harbor and the lighthouse. And the burgundy chair sat ready, waiting for the next person who needed to learn what it felt like to rest without fear. The work continued. The chair remained. And somewhere, Sarah smiled. Months passed. Seasons turned. Robert's hair went from white to almost translucent, his hands developing a tremor that made writing difficult. But still he sat in the chair most evenings, Sarah the dog at his feet, waiting for the next knock on the door. Emily visited twice a week now, officially to coordinate with the network, unofficially to check on Robert. She'd bring groceries, help with paperwork, sit with him while he told stories about Sarah and Duke and all the kids who'd passed through. "You should rest more," she'd say gently. "I'll rest when I'm dead," Robert would reply. "Right now, there's work." Patricia, the young social worker Emily had chosen as Robert's successor, came 3 times a week for training. She was 28, sharp-minded, with the same patient determination Sarah had possessed. She'd grown up in foster care herself, bounced through 7 homes before aging out at 18. She understood what it felt like to need the chair. "How will I know when someone really needs help versus just wants attention?" Patricia asked during one session. Robert gestured to Sarah, the dog. "You won't always know, but she will. Trust her instincts. Sarah trained Duke, Marcus trained this one. They're never wrong about pain." The network continued to grow. By Robert's 85th birthday, the Burgundy Chair Initiative operated in 22 states, with 37 satellite offices and over 200 trained social workers. Marcus's therapy dog program had expanded internationally. Jennifer's clinic model had been replicated in 40 cities. David's school program had become standard policy in 3 state education systems. And at the center of it all remained one house, one chair, one old man, and one dog, still doing the work Sarah had started 40 years ago. The end came quietly, as endings often do. Robert woke one November morning feeling different, lighter somehow, transparent. He made his coffee, let Sarah the dog out, and settled into the burgundy chair for what he somehow knew would be the last time. Emily found him there 3 hours later, Patricia beside her. They'd had plans to meet that morning, discuss transition plans. Instead, they found Robert peaceful in the chair, Sarah the dog sitting vigil at his feet, one hand resting on Robert's knee as if offering comfort. "He waited for you," Patricia whispered, though Robert had already been gone for an hour. He waited to make sure the work would continue. Emily knelt beside the chair, taking Robert's cool hand in hers. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for carrying Sarah's work forward, for teaching all of us what it means to pass on the chair." They buried Robert beside Sarah and Duke, beneath the oak tree that had become sacred ground. The funeral filled the house and spilled into the yard. Hundreds of people who'd been touched by Sarah's chair coming to say goodbye to the man who'd maintained it for 12 years after his wife's death. Daniel brought his son, James, now 8 years old. Marcus brought a new puppy, Duke's great-granddaughter, to present to Patricia. Jennifer came with her staff from the clinic. David brought his students. Person after person, life after life, ripple after ripple, all converging to honor the man who'd understood that sometimes love means continuing someone else's work, even when you don't fully understand it at first. Patricia inherited the house, the chair, and Sarah the dog. She moved in that winter, setting up the guest room exactly as Sarah had, preparing for the work to continue. The first kid came in January, a 17-year-old named Sam, who'd been kicked out for coming out as trans. Sarah the dog alerted while Patricia walked through the park, and Patricia followed the script she'd learned from Robert, who'd learned it from Sarah, who'd learned it from a lifetime of caring. "Would you like to sit?" Patricia asked, gesturing to the bench. Sam sat. Sarah the dog positioned herself nearby. And Patricia waited, patient and present, exactly as she'd been taught. "I heard about a chair," Sam said finally. "People at the shelter, they said there's a place with a chair where you can be safe for a while." "There is," Patricia confirmed. "Would you like to see it?" They walked to the house together. Patricia opened the door, and Sam's eyes found the burgundy chair immediately, drawn to it as if by magnetism. "Is that it?" Sam asked. "That's it," Patricia said. "People have been sitting in that chair for 40 years. Every single one of them found what they needed, even if it took time. Would you like to try?" Sam sat. Sarah the dog took her position at Sam's feet. And in that moment, the work continued, passed forward again, carrying Sarah's legacy into yet another generation. The burgundy chair held Sam that day, and many more after. It held whoever came next, and whoever came after that. The fabric wore thinner. The frame creaked occasionally. But it never broke, never failed. Because the magic wasn't in the chair. It was in the promise every person who sat there made afterward. To see someone else's pain. To offer presence without judgment. To pass forward the moment of safety they'd received. Sarah started it with one dog and one chair, and one commitment to caring. Robert continued it with grief, transformed into purpose. And now Patricia carried it forward, along with Emily and Marcus and Jennifer and David and Daniel and Sam and countless others. Each one a thread in the tapestry Sarah had begun, weaving 4 decades ago. The ripple spread infinitely outward, touching lives that would touch lives that would touch lives, forever. And in the house on Maple Street, the burgundy chair sat ready, worn but unbroken, waiting for the next person who needed to learn what it felt like to rest without fear. The work continued. The chair remained. And somewhere, Sarah and Robert and Duke watched together, proud of what had grown from one woman's secret revolution, one dog's gift, and one man's willingness to learn that love sometimes means carrying forward what you don't yet understand. The end. Or perhaps more accurately, the continuation. Because some stories don't end, they just keep spreading. One burgundy chair, one scared kid, one moment of safety at a time,